Welcome back to Adventures in Freeze Drying. Today we are going to make Italian beef, which is one of my favorites. Just easy to make a sandwich, or you can add to something else, put on top of some mashed potatoes. Just a good staple in our household. It's pretty simple to make. I'm going to talk about two different types of roasts and my preferred roast. There's also another way to make this besides in the Instant Pot. We'll talk about that, but hang with me and we'll get started on making Italian beef. I am incredibly fortunate, and my in-laws keep me in beef, so I do not buy my beef from the grocery store. And so I have two types of roasts. I have an arm roast, which has a big chunk of bone in the middle, and then the meat's a little bit more solid through here, so I'm able to get some nice bigger chunks for what I want to do. So I prefer an arm roast for making my Italian beef. You can use a chuck roast. The bigger difference here is you've got this longer bone running through the chuck roast. There tends to be a little bit more gristle and just fattier layers to cut out. And I don't feel like for the poundage, you don't get as much meat per pound as I do if I use an arm roast. So if you have an arm roast available to you, I would use an arm roast. Again, these are beef roasts. And save the chuck for something else. The first step is simply to take our roast, and we want to get it cut down into, chunks that I'd say this is probably 2 inches tall, so 2 by 2 inch chunks, as much as you can, getting rid of as much fat and gristle along the way, so that way that's just not in your meat. It's not going to help it freeze dry to have that get cooked in the process. So you really want to help this get thinned down, get rid of some of the membranes, so this cooks up really well. And so we're just going to cut. I'm going to cut, and I'm going to cut. And so chunks like this are just fine. Again, about 2 by 2. They're not perfectly square, but nice big chunks of meat. So I'm going to go ahead and get these roasts both chunked up, and then we'll move on to the next steps. I am going to go ahead, and since I'm going to do 2 of these arm roasts, I'm going to hold on to these bones. I have a lot of marrow in them. Something I've been wanting to research a little more is making bone broth and getting that freeze dried and potentially putting that into some capsules. So I'm going to set that aside for the bone broth. The other thing is you're cutting meat off of a round bone. Not everything's a perfectly square piece, and that's okay. These will still work for the recipe. So we'll go ahead, and I've got one of my roasts cut up. I'm going to take 1 packet of my Italian dressing seasoning mix and 1 packet of my au jus mix, and I'm going to dust my roast chunks with that and let it kind of sit in that as I'm chopping up that other roast to help the flavors sink in. I have my second roast chopped up, so I'm going to add another package of the Italian dressing mix and au jus and get everything covered as we get my Instant Pot ready to do some sauteing. If you wanted to do this in a crock pot or slow cooker instead of an Instant Pot, you sure can. I have learned I just prefer to do it in an Instant Pot. The first steps would all be the same. You'd want to get to here. But right now you would load this in your crock pot with 2 cups of beef broth and then let this cook for 6 to 8 hours on low heat. I like doing it this way because it allows me to get it cooked in like 45 minutes. So if I want to deal with this right now and get it ready for the freeze dryer, it's just a little bit faster. It has an extra step though of where I'm going to go ahead and sear the meat before I do the cooking in the Instant Pot. So I'm going to turn on saute on my Instant Pot. And I'm going to add some oil to the bottom. And then once that's good and hot, we will start searing each piece of meat before we go ahead and put them, get them ready to cook. Make sure you allow enough time for your Instant Pot to actually get hot to do the sauteing. And then we're simply going to put these in. I'm using olive oil. You can use coconut oil. You can use Crisco. You can use whatever oil you would like to sear up your meat. That is not going to change the process at all. You do want to make sure you sear all sides of each piece of meat to really lock the juices in as it's cooking in that Instant Pot when we get it under pressure. This little piece just isn't going to take very long, so I'm going to flip it around a little faster. We'll flip them over. Again, just trying to brown each side up, getting it seared to help lock in the juices and the flavor as it's cooking under high pressure. And you want to make sure you sear all sides of the meat. As I'm getting each piece finished up, I check all the sides. And then I'm going to go ahead and just remove it and put another piece in. Add more oil as needed. And once each piece is done, we'll move on from here. I'm down to my last couple pieces, and the spices and stuff are stuck to the bottom pretty good. So as those last couple pieces are getting seared here, I'm going to add some beef broth to start cooking some of that, deglazing that pan. And I'll get those last couple kind of finished up here. They're sort of done. I'm not too terribly worried about it as long as at least one side's been seared well. I'm going to have enough meat in here. So I'm going to go ahead and let that kind of come to a boil, finish getting that meat out of the pan. I'll also add a little bit of my 1 cup of broth to this to kind of get those spices out of here and into my pot. And then we'll get all of this ready to go. With this boiling well, I am going to cancel that saute, add a touch more of broth, and just really let those spices on the bottom kind of unstick from the bottom of my Instant Pot. I'm not going to add a ton because you don't want to overload moisture into your Instant Pot, but we're going to let that sit for a couple minutes as I start adding meat back and getting everything else ready to go. I'm adding a 1/2 cup of broth directly to the meat inside the Instant Pot. Then I'm going to add a 1/2 cup of broth to the bowl that had all the spices in it and the meat in it. And I'm going to go ahead and get a spatula out and scrape all that in there so all that goodness gets into the bowl with my meat to add flavor. So I've gotten the bowl kind of cleaned up by using my spatula and splashing the broth around. And now I'm just going to make sure all that extra flavor is added in there. And then we'll get the Instant Pot set to go. Going to go ahead and lock my lid into position. And then we're going to go ahead and hit pressure cook. I like to cook my 2 roasts, since they were 3-pound roasts. I like to go for an hour on high pressure. I make sure that I'm not venting up top. This will take over an hour because it has to get to pressure first. And then we'll see you as soon as this is done. Our hour of time has lapsed, so I'm going to hit cancel on the Instant Pot. And as soon as this naturally releases, which means I can open this without having to vent, then we will go ahead and pull this out. And that's going to happen in 3, 2, 1. The Instant Pot has naturally released. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the meat out of the Instant Pot. And then using 2 forks, you're going to want to shred this down. Oh man, this smells so good. I wish there was such a thing as smell-o-vision. And then as we get it shredded, I'm going to go ahead and put it on freeze-drying trays and get it frozen. Basically, I'm able to get 1 3-pound roast per medium tray without even coming close to overloading this. I'm going to cover these with lids, put them in my freezer simply because I do have something else in my freeze dryer right now. Meat always surprises me. It never takes as long as you think it should. I normally have 24 hours of extra dry time, so this has been going for almost 8 extra hours of dry time. I only have 2 trays in here, so I'm not surprised it went super duper fast. So we're going to go ahead and pull this out and see how it rehydrates. One of the coolest things about meat is that you can't overhydrate it. So I've got about a 1/2 cup of hot beef broth and a 1/2 cup of hot water because I just want to see if there's a huge taste difference between the two because this was pretty seasoned meat. So I'm just going to pour on, I know that should be more than enough water, but we'll just pour off the excess once this is hydrated. So I'm going to cover these now with just a towel and let them sit for about 5 minutes. This has been reheating for about 5 minutes now, so we're going to go ahead and check and see how tender this seems by fork. definitely is getting there. It smells good. It's starting to smell like Italian beef again. I'm going to go ahead and just give this a couple more minutes to be on the safe side, and then we will give both of these a taste test. Let's go ahead and give these a taste test. This one was just in water. There's still some water left over, but this feels nice and tender. I don't feel any crunchiness as I'm going through here with my fork. So, maybe not quite as good as fresh. Like the water just, it's good, it has flavor. Would absolutely be wonderful if this was all you had, like my goodness, there's flavor here. But when it's fresh, it's the flavor is just a little bit richer. So what's the difference here if I do that in the beef broth instead? The beef broth is right back to full flavored Italian beef. So if I had actually freeze dried the broth that came off of this, if I'd had some of that in here and I'd added just water, I think it would have been fine. But if you don't freeze dry the broth to go with it, you're going to want to use beef broth if you can. It is still tasty, not bad with water. But if you want it to be just like you made it, you need to use beef broth, or make sure you have some of that broth from when you cooked it freeze dried and use that to help rehydrate it. That's ready for a sandwich. That's wonderful. If you haven't already, take a minute to subscribe down below. I try to have videos out about every week, every other week. Every once in a while, I just get off of there. Don't want to over inundate you with videos about freeze drying. Thank you so much for joining me on Adventures in Freeze Drying, and we will see you next time.